Right, here we are, V2 viewers. We're going to review, or I'm going to review for your delectation, the wonderful lady here, Maggie Oliver, speaking to Andrew Gold on his channel Heretics, Gert. Now, she is a real bona fide police whistleblower. She's an amazing lady. I love her to bits. I mean, obviously, I don't stalk her. You know what I mean? But she's got a charity, and I give to the charity because I just think she's the bee's knees. So we're going to review this fantastic interview she gave to Andrew Gold. I love his channel. Nip over and watch Andrew Gold. He's amazing. So we're going to jump in. It's not nice listening, but I feel we need to do it, or I need to do it anyway. So let's go. Come on, Maggie, darling. What's happening?
To go on a job in Rochdale, which was identical to the job in Manchester in 2005.
Oh, hang on. So I've skipped forward a bit. I've skipped forward to the preamble bit. She was in the police in the early 2000s, and she was seconded to deal with the Rochdale grooming gangs and the industrial... I use the word troubling, but the accurate word in the dictionary would begin with R, have 4 letters and end in E, and have an A and a P in it. But they were euphemistically called grooming gangs. So, yeah, and just to cut to the chase, unlike other apparent police whistleblowers that weren't police or whistleblowers that purport to have done that, she gets through the whole interview without calling children the P word that rhymes with destitute. Do you get me? Never once refers to the children as that. She knows they're victims and they've been exploited. So there's that to her. And she had the most awful, terrible time. And unlike certain other people's narrative, and it is only a narrative, and I'm talking about the Wedger, she didn't wait until she had her pension. She picked up her bag and walked out. And for that, she's got backbone of steel, and I applaud her, because I would have done exactly the bloody same, seeing as how what she went through. So it's quite a long interview, and obviously I'm not going to do 57 minutes of it. So we're just going to make the salient points. Come on, darling. Tell Auntie Gert.
And the drama Three Girls kind of covers this a little bit.
Yeah, they made a drama.
But I told them I wasn't interested.
BBC.
I wasn't putting myself through that again, where I...
That's the BBC drama for the
Yeah,
people outside of Britain.
Sorry. Yeah, there was a BBC drama ultimately commissioned that we won 6 BAFTAs. I think it's back on iPlayer now. You can watch it again.
You were played.
I was played by Leslie Sharp. Yeah. And that...
I love Leslie Sharp. She's a really good English actress. She's on a lot of, sort of these sort of docudramas. Bless her. Leslie Sharp. I can't think of where she's been, but there's a few of them, isn't there, like her, that play really good parts in docudramas and dramas for the BBC. Let's go.
Drama actually very clearly explains what child sexual exploitation is. It explains what grooming gangs do.
Do you notice how she said the exact precise language and didn't use any derogatory terms?
Didn't do was focus on the failures of the police, on the Crown Prosecution Service,
exactly.
On what I would consider corruption and gross criminal neglect within...
So not only you, my darling, most forward-thinking and normal adult, sort of well-adjusted human beings would call it that as well, my darling. Go on.
The agencies that are meant to protect children. So if I roll back to the start of that job, it became known as Operation Span, and I was asked to join it. Now, I was approached, and the first thing I was told was that there'd been a routine property review in Greater Manchester Police property system.
I love Maggie. I know you're talking about a really difficult subject here, darling, but I'm just going to pan out and look at you. Isn't she well put together, darling? Don't you think? I mean, most of us would never do those boots, even in my 20s, And she's just amazing, and she really presents us. She is a real advocate. She's obviously the shop window to her charity, and I think she does that very well. She's very articulate. She's very appropriate, very professional, and she presents herself exceedingly well, in my opinion. And she's at least a decade on me, so kudos to you, darling.
And a fetus had been found. And that had been seized 2 years previously from a little girl who had been just 13 when she was made pregnant.
Learning
She
disabilities.
didn't know that the police had seized it. They'd never told her. They'd never told her mum. They'd not had any consent. And yet they knew that she was being sexually abused by a gang of men. They needed DNA from that to prove who had made her pregnant. So because of my skills with vulnerable people, I was asked to go on to that job to bring on board not only that little girl who was called Ruby, that's her alias, that's what she was referred to in the drama, 3 girls. Would I approach Ruby and her family, tell them that we had a fetus, keep them on side and ask them, ask the family, would they cooperate with an investigation and help us to prosecute the abusers? So that was a big
Good
ask
luck.
because that family wouldn't even let a police officer through the door. And that was because 2 years previously, they had already spoken to the police and social services.
Yeah.
They didn't know about the fetus being seized, but Ruby's sister was called Amber. And as a 14, 15-year-old child, she too had been horrendously abused. But then at the age of 15, she was accused of being some kind of a madam and had been arrested.
Oh my God.
Nothing had come of
We're
it,
having a
but it had
laugh.
terrified her. And I was asked to also gain her trust.
Yeah.
And ask her whether she would support.
Yeah, quickly, because the dynamic in that sort of scenario is that they will very often get one of the girls to procure other girls because, I don't know how to say it, once violated is sort of old, becomes, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. So they need, I think they were called, wasn't it called Fresh Meat, a book? Fresh Meat. There was a book written about it as well, and I'm sure that was called Fresh Meat or New Meat, something like that. So yeah, 15-year-old procure my knee, kiss my fat ass. I've never heard anything so bloody ridiculous. They're all bullied within an inch of their life, and very often the perpetrators would threaten the little children with getting their families, which used to galvanise the children to sort of do what they were told. Yeah, come on.
Police prosecution. So
like
because
Victorian
of my
Britain, isn't it?
experiences earlier, I was not prepared to go on that job. But I was given cast iron guarantees that if
I love
I
that haircut.
brought
I love
these
it.
kids on board, that there would not be a repeat of Operation Augusta, that they would be supported right the way through to court,
Yes.
and that I would be allowed to support them.
Well, that's what they said.
Alongside that, I was given official policy documents documenting those promises.
Yeah.
In relation to Amber, also the top lawyer in the Crown.
And it goes on to illustrate the fact of how professional she was, because she was used to being let down. She had it all written down that they were this was real. They were really going to do it this time. They weren't going to obfuscate the issue. They weren't going to sweep it under the rug. They weren't going to just silence the victims. And she agreed to do this and to help the police, bang the perpetrators to rights. And they didn't only let down the girls again, the victims, they let down her. And as I just said, her reaction to that was to pick up her bag and walk her flip out of there, which is what any adult human being would do with a conscience.
Prosecution service had assessed why she'd been arrested.
Well, I'd give them a finger as well on the way out the door. I bloody well would. I mean, so gracious. And her response to it was to leave and to set up her own charity. And to this day, she has supported each and every one of the victims that that was in her auspices. So fair play to her and kudos.
It took 2 months, actually. And at the end of that period of time, he said she should never have been arrested. She is a victim in the same way as all the other children. And with those guarantees, I agreed to go on that job.
Yeah.
Is it worth mentioning at this point that I believe it was these gangs were 99% British Pakistani.
Yeah, they were 99%
I think
British
you could believe
Pakistani
like that,
Muslim
Brooke.
men. There were one or two, like Afghanistani. But at that point in time, nobody would speak about that.
No.
Because it was...
I can't say that.
It was a very uncomfortable truth. And I don't think we talk about it very much now. But I do think that there is a...
Well, it wasn't an uncomfortable truth. They were from an ethnic background. It is in their remit, it is in their vibe. That's what they do. And like, I've always heard other people say, oh, well, what you're saying that white people don't abuse. Yeah, but the thing is, when white people abuse, right, we can all talk about it and shout about it and scream about it and shout at them and talk at them and tell them what we think of them. But when it's a certain ethnicity, we're not allowed to say anything. Our silence is violence, and our silence is complicity in this case. And the whole country has been complicit for a long time in their silence of not actually calling a bleeding spade a spade and calling them out and saying, look, if you want to behave like that, there's a country you can go and behave like that in. But guess what? It isn't ours. When in Rome, you do as the Romans. That's all I'm saying. It's like if you go to their country and do something, well, get thrown in jail. You'd probably get whipped or stoned, wouldn't you? Yes, but they come over here and, yeah, we're going to, yeah, you're jumping ahead, Kurt, be quiet.
An acceptance. I don't think it can be avoided anymore that this particular kind of sexual crime, grooming gangs, is predominantly Pakistani Muslim men. Now, I hear them frequently referred to as Asian grooming gangs.
No, Asians, China.
But I know
Taiwan.
that that's not true. You know, they're not from Thailand. They're not Sikhs. They're not
Not
Hindus.
Koreans, no.
They're not from Japan.
No.
Yet they are predominantly Pakistani Muslim men.
Yeah, but that's the British media and political class that have, instead of using the right term, they've said they're Asian. It's like they don't know their geography, these people, innit? They're that dumb. They don't. And obviously the people from Asia are like, hang on, it's not us. Why are you calling them Asian? It's nothing to do with us. Do you know? Oh, dearie me.
So, I mean, even
What
this
a
last
tangled
week, I
web
had
we weave
an
when
email
first we
from,
practice to deceive.
a Sikh man saying that that community are really upset that these gangs are referred to as Asians.
Yeah.
So, but the authorities tiptoed around that.
Because they're cowards.
And I do think that was one of the reasons why this...
And I'll tell you another thing as well, right? In the areas, and it's increasingly all across the country, but in the particular areas that this actually was a problem in, the ethnicity involved had been so facilitated to be so much part of the establishment where they held civil service, police, social services. They were all high up in that. They were councillors, they were mayors, they were this, they were MPs. So, and we all know that it doesn't matter what your ethnicity and what your religion is, above a certain pay grade, you're all on the same page, so you all stick together. Doesn't matter what melanin you may or may not have, and what God you may or may not bow down to. Above a certain pay grade, you're all on the same page and you all stick together. And with that, the people that were being preyed on were sort of, I don't know what to say, working class, sort of subculture of working class people very often, and underprivileged children. Yeah, let's put it that way. Yes, of an English indigenous ethnicity.
To evolve and go unchallenged for perhaps 20 years, if I'm honest.
Ollie,
My take...
Maggie, darling, I love you, but it was going on when I was young. And if you watch another channel on here, I think it's called the RAPE of Britain, and it's got Steve Lenham has done it. I think he's done it on Getter, and somebody has put it on YouTube. You can go and find it yourself. And it made me ill listening to it, because he's done his own bit. But he's so badly tarnished with the media and political class, calling him far right, you know, the opposite of left. That one, he's that. Apparently he is, but he's not, if you know what I mean. He was just trying to stick up for them. And likewise, so was Maggie. And she's tenaciously kept at it, even when it was really unfashionable. She's been going and going and going since, well, I first came across her in about 2014 or 2015. So, yeah, and She definitely has made an impact, and so has Steve Lennon, really, to be fair. And both her and Steve Lennon have supported the girls in a way that other people haven't. And very often the people that covered up are now sat in the House of Lords, and that's all I'm saying.
Take on that always is that for me, this has always been about protecting children. And I don't care where an abuser comes from. You know, I don't care if it's Jeffrey Epstein.
It's a unique and individual concept, Maggie. One would hardly believe that. Protecting children. I mean, to start with, haven't they got the Children's Act 1989? A lot of people in my day did a lot to enforce and to bring in. Yeah? So that was obviously scuppered. I mean, I should think every one of those girls would have a case in some sort of human rights court or some court that they've been really badly let down. And some of the injuries they've incurred and the life impacting injuries they've incurred, mental, emotional and physical, need compensating. It's probably what they're worried about. It's a bit like the post office thing, isn't it, again, but in a vastly worse sort of scenario.
Or Harvey
They all stick together, the
Weinstein,
elites, don't they? Don't care.
A priest in the Catholic Church. The law in this country says you cannot have 40, 50, 60-year-old man cannot get a child of 11, 12, 13 drunk out of their head and then have sex with them. That is rape.
Nor can any man over the age of 16, and even if they're under the age of 16, getting a girl of 11 or 12 intoxicated and then behaving in a obnoxious way towards her. They need something, don't they? You know, over the age of 16, it doesn't matter whether it's 16 to 99, they shouldn't be doing it. But go on, Maggie, darling. Sorry, I digest.
And the law says that is unlawful.
Of course it's
unlawful.
unlawful.
For me, it was simple. We had the evidence.
It's so simple, they don't get it.
Even with Ruby, we had a fetus. We proved who had got her pregnant. Ruby had special educational needs.
Oh, my God.
She had the mental capacity of a younger child.
Oh, my God.
And she gave multiple interviews on video to me, naming multiple abusers. At the end of the road, even in relation to Ruby, that man was never charged with rape.
Quelle surprise.
He was charged with conspiracy.
Oh.
He was out of prison in less than 4 years.
Well, I never.
Ruby didn't know he hadn't been charged with rape.
Heck of me.
He was allowed to go back to Rochdale where these crimes were happening. And she bumped into him in the local supermarket, not even knowing he was out of prison. So those things really made me angry, made me ashamed to be a police officer.
What a lovely lady you are, darling.
It was the second time I'd seen this happen. And I thought, it made me very, very ill, actually, because I couldn't make any sense of it.
I'm ashamed to be British listening to this.
For me, it was simple. You had if you just simplify it to Ruby, because your listeners, I can't go into everything. It's really complicated. But I did write a book called Survivors. So if anybody really wants to understand the full complexities of it, it's all written down in there.
Well, briefly, should we just say roughly how many children were involved in this Rochdale gangs?
Hundreds.
Countless. But 2 weeks ago,
it's going on for decades,
there was an
40, 50 years.
report published, which has taken 12 years to come out. I've worked with an independent review team for 6 years.
Well, I'm going to cut to the chase on this story because basically the girls were judged by predominantly male, and they were males of British and ethnic origins. All of them, you can imagine the pay grade made them middle class. All of them probably drunk at the same watering holes and knew each other, scratched each other's back. And the girls were decided that it was a lifestyle choice that they'd chosen at the age of 11 and 12. Yeah. And actually, she's only talking about this case in this interview. But the girls were sometimes like 8, 9 or 10, my darlings.
That report 2 weeks ago officially found that there were almost 100 abusers, again, that there were in excess
multiply
of,
that.
I think they said 76 children. And yet, eventually there was a trial built around one child. That for me is not justice. We had the evidence. we had the children. The official findings of that report was that Greater Manchester Police were not prepared to put resources into that.
I just had to get
investigation.
myself a drink to listen to
And
this
that was
shit.
the same reasoning that was given about the 2005 job in the official report that reported in 2020. So both of those reports I could have written 15, 20 years ago. Well, 15 years and 12 years ago, because there is nothing in those reports that I wasn't saying at the time.
Yeah.
And in relation to the Rochdale case, my final day on that job, it was on a Friday afternoon. There was a meeting.
Go on, girl.
The first time the barrister had been in to see us, I wasn't invited into that meeting.
Oh, what surprise.
Now, Amber had, as I say, had just identified 10 of the first 12 of her abusers. She had put her life on the line for 8 months. We were delivering precisely what senior officers at Greater Manchester Police had asked me to do. And they came out of that meeting, and I was told by a colleague, have they said anything to you, Maggie? No. Right. Well, they're not going to use Amber anymore.
My God.
Now, this was the second time I'd heard it, and this time I'd been given cast iron guarantees that if these kids told me and told the police what had happened to them, that they would be supported all the way through to trial. And
As
here
per
I
the
am
Children
being
Act,
told again,
1989.
And I literally picked my bag up because I would have punched somebody.
Yes.
I was incandescent with rage.
Darling, if I'd have been there, I'd have held your coat while you punched them, darling. I would have done. Go on.
Angry. I was incredulous. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Oh, I can't believe it.
I walked off that
Well,
job.
actually,
I never went back
I
on
can.
that. Now, in relation to Amber, bear in mind the top lawyer in the CPS had decided that she was a victim. Even though she'd been arrested,
Right.
before we were allowed to even go
You
anywhere
arrest a
near her,
15-year-old,
they had,
for Christ's sake, for
officially
procuring. What a load of
designated her a
bullshit.
victim. I left that
BS.
job. I sat at home trying to think, what am I going to do? Because at that point, I honestly believed it was a lazy officer who wasn't doing the job.
Right, sweetheart, I'm
just-
going to cut to the chase. There was a hell of a lot of lazy officers, and I think you were being very kind to think that there was just a few lazy officers pushing a bit of paper here. It's far deeper than that. The girls were called goulars. They think it's another haram, which isn't the word. I think haram just means unbeliever. A goulart is a white trash. And that is what they were termed. And that went high up. As I said, it was considered that these 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls had made a lifestyle choice, no less. Now, I don't want to put an even bigger damp squid, but I wouldn't be being truthful if I hadn't actually pointed out that many girls have died during this process, or during this, it's a debacle and scandal, really. And the indolence, I'm being kind when I say indolence, of the people in authority is absolutely, and I mean, it transpires at the end that the guy that was in charge, actually, was he the chief constable or something, who came out and said the inquiry, they had some Mickey Mouse bleeding inquiry, you know, like they do, some kangaroo courts bullshit, that the girls had made a lifestyle choice, you know. Now is a lord, sits in the House of Lords as a victim advocate, my darlings, a victim advocate, yes.
So naive. I really, really thought, I never for one moment thought that the whole organisation, that the whole of police in the UK
Was corrupt,
had made a conscious decision.
was cowardly.
This is how these cases would be dealt with. I mean, the last 12 years have been an education for me.
Can I just point out as well that what the period of time that you're talking about, Sir Keir Starmer, the erstwhile now leader, a prospective new Prime Minister, of the Labour Socialist Anti-Social Socialist Party, that love everybody unless you're working class and then you're just scum. was the head of prosecution at the period of time she's talking about.
So what's
He actually
behind
was
this?
given a sir,
Are we
a
dealing
knighthood,
with
you
people
know.
who are sort of afraid of offending minorities, or are we dealing
I'm
with
not. They're rapists.
potentially people who are friends with the bad people who are infiltrating the police?
Both those two official reports have said that the police dropped both those jobs because they would not put resources into it. So it was money. So it's about prioritising the resources within the police force. But
Yeah, I
have
think,
no-
yeah, okay, yeah, I dig what you're saying, but I think that's also a hedge they hide behind. Oh, it is finances. I think it's a lot deeper than that. I really do. I'm sorry, I do. But there
no
you go, it's
doubt
just me.
that part of that was a judgment of these children.
They just wanted to make it go
that
away.
They were from difficult backgrounds, that they were... I mean, how many times have you heard that these children were making a lifestyle choice, that they were complicit in their abuse?
Hang on.
And my response to that is always, if this was the chief constable, or if it was Rishi Sunak's daughter,
Yeah.
or, you know, the daughter of
Right.
a wealthy individual,
Yep.
would the police still say that that child was making a lifestyle?
Okay, darling, right, yeah, totally agree with you. I live in a county in England that about 20 years ago, the chief constable of our county was caught, I think it was around about Christmas, New Year era time scale. Drink driving. He was stopped in a police traffic, you know, when they breathalyse people because it's Christmas, yeah. And he was as pissed as a newt. And he obviously failed the test. And he said to the little police constable, little rookie, he said, "Don't you know who I am?" So that's what you're dealing with here. You know, there's rules for the little people and the people above that. You know, they all stick together. It's like I've so many times said, above a certain amount of money, they're all on the same page. Anybody below them is just scum, you know, and that's the way they look at it. And very often these so-called, well, they're not so-called, they are perpetrators, actually were business owners. They owned restaurants, they owned this, they owned that, they owned especially taxi services, my darlings. Yes, very worryingly. And also they're very interconnected. They all worshipped at the same, I don't want to use the word, but say the house of worship. So they all knew each other. And amongst the congregation of this house of worship, of these ethnic people, they had mayors, top policemen, top solicitors, lawyers, councillors. As I say, they all very intertwined and very thick, slapping each other's back. And the white, indigenous, poor, working class, or I'm not being nasty or anything, but below working class people were just scum on the bottom of their shoe. And they were there for their taking, delectation, really. And when anything came on top, they all just covered up for one another. Go on.
Our choice. And I would say absolutely not. But these children, I would say, were the most vulnerable in our country. You know, mostly on Augusta, those kids were all living in care homes. And I use that word care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's how it's referred to. But those children are not cared for.
No, they're not.
They don't know love. They're
No,
not cared for.
exactly.
Nobody cares about them.
No.
And so when an abuser
people
will,
in care homes, yeah, that staff the care homes, they've got what's called a job. You know, they go in, they clock on, right? They do their shift and they clock out and go home. You know, and the rest is just bunched, you get me? So, no, all the time you're paying somebody to CARE for children or dogs or cats or old people, yeah, you're always going to get this dynamic going on. Yes, if you're not very careful, you know.
target a vulnerable child, and they can spot vulnerability easily. They give that child attention. You know, they might take them out.
It's an age-old trope. Age-old trope.
A bit of jewellery, food. Those children initially feel important
because they
think
had nothing.
that somebody cares about them.
Yeah, exactly.
That is exploitation, and these gangs are so sophisticated because the authorities have never addressed it.
It's funny because if you were Mr. Wedgie, you'd called it a word begin with P. You know. Now do you see why I take such umbrage with that bleeding charlatan?
You know, and in the Rochdale case, most of those children were living at home. But, for instance, Ruby and Amber, their brother had
listen to this, Sean.
in the care home that Cyril Smith
Oh my God.
abused children in, and the brother
Cyril Smith, for people living overseas, was a big fat lard mountain Liberal MP of Rochdale during the 70s and I think up into the 80s. That because he was an MP, like Savile, got himself around children to abuse them. You had to see the size of this man mountain. You knew, you only had to look at him to know. I mean, you know, Todger the size of a bleeding thimble. Horrible, disgusting. I mean, lived with his mum. I mean, you know, capiche? Do you remember Savile? Oh, I love me mum. Go on. No, not you, darling.
Met his abuser in the street. He was working for the post office many years later.
Yeah.
And then he took a drug overdose, and Amber actually found him dead on the couch.
Yeah.
Mum had a nervous breakdown. There were 8 children. So they were like bringing themselves up, and it wasn't...
So, like, what she's saying is the 8 children, Amber was the towards the end of the 8 children, but the older brother had been abused in a different era by the local MP, Cyril Smith, you know. And after, through the 80s into the 90s, there was a new kid on the block, which wasn't, say, white Indigenous people. It was a different ethnicity, and they had a different game plan, which included the poor kids, his sisters.
They were living in a very difficult situation, and my take on it was, and still is, that the family should have been supported because they weren't bad people.
Of course, I don't
they
care.
were just struggling.
I don't give a flip.
And the children were left to their own devices. So when somebody turns up and gives them some attention and a little bit of care, the children, you know, a 12-year-old child doesn't see that this is bad. Both of those children now can look back and they know full well. You know, when I'm with Ruby, because they're like my own children in many ways.
Oh,
I've,
bless her.
been alongside them for 10, 12 years.
Oh.
When I talk to Ruby now, I mean, she's got children that are almost the age that she was when she was being raped. And she can't understand now how that could be allowed to happen. I can't understand it. But with Amber...
No one can understand it, darling.
...as a victim. And I went off the job. I couldn't
I've
make
got something. The thing is, like, you can't understand it if you're British and you've lived this last 50 years. You kind of can understand it in another sort of gothic noir type of way. You can see it very, very clearly how it happened, why it happened, and how it was elongated instead of nipped in the bud. And anybody that did try to stand up and flag it up was sort of poo-pooed and called names, especially if they were perceived to be working class. I've said it a million times. If Steve Lennon's working class, then I'm bloody Rockefeller. Do you get me? You know what I mean? It's just what your accent is. Oh, you come across as working class, say you're a geezer, so you... How dare you talk about these girls, you know? Oh, you're racist, you are, for saying the bloody obvious. And the other thing is, as we're hurtling towards a general election, I found that GB News, Talk TV, and a certain amount of legacy media that I get on YouTube, because I never watch telly. I mean, I care for my mental health. Never, ever watch television. I haven't watched television for years, and I've been so much better for it. But what I'm given to believe is it's now absolutely okay to rubbish a certain ethnicity in a way that a year or so ago you'd have been put in prison, and people have been put in prison for just saying... I mean, Lennon, he went outside the court, stood on public ground, and as certain people were going into court to be sentenced to prison sentences for troubling on an industrial scale underage children, he was asking the perpetrators as they went in what they were, what they were expecting. Are you looking forward to your court? Do you, going to prison? What do you think you're going to get? He was arrested and put in prison himself, and he was put in a prison that was full of that certain ethnicity. So, and he really... so many white Indigenous working class... well, not working class, but just white Indigenous people have tried to stand up and tried to speak about this situation. But you're beaten back. You're told you're racist. You're told you're disgusting. You haven't got a stake in society. And, of course, it's like I say... they're missing the point that these Indigenous people aren't some minority. They're actually increasingly the majority, if you get me. So, and also you've got the happy clappy bloody, what is it? Soap, not dope, whatever it's called, dope, not soap, but the lefty loonies. They are paid government stooges that do the dirty work on behalf of the political media class to shut up anybody that dares to speak the truth, if you get me. And I'm going to say it again. They're all working for the person that's going to be Prime Minister, who was head of prosecution at the time of the grooming scandal, and dropped all the charges, not only against the historical child abuse cases that were coming out of the Jimmy Savile and the politicians in Westminster, but also the grooming gangs.
Make any sense of it. I spent about 6 weeks trying to decide what I was going to do. But ultimately what was happening in the background, we had Hillsborough all over the telly, and families that had lost 30 years.
Right, yeah, I remember Hillsborough. Hillsborough, the police dressed it up. What it was, a load of people, if you're not in Britain, were suffocated because of bad policing, and they were all suffocated going into a football match in Liverpool, I believe, or somewhere. And the police, being the police, sort of blamed it all on them. It's their fault. It wasn't the police's fault. Bad policing. They shut all the gates, and they had one entrance open, so people were being let in until they were just suffocated to death. And the police put it out for decades. It was 1989, I think it might have been 1989. Yeah. And they put it out for decades. They did it to themselves, you know. They were all fighting amongst themselves. No, well, it was the police's fault. So what I'm saying is the police were corrupt. They've covered up the Hillsborough. They've covered up the grooming gangs. It makes you wonder what else they're covering up, my darling.
The lives trying to fight for the truth.
If you're poor, it's always your fault, you know.
It's just that was a disaster at a soccer football stadium where people were crushed, and the police appeared to have covered up.
They blamed the families. Yeah. They said that the victims were drunk and they were fighting, and it was their own fault that they had been squashed to death.
Oh my God.
And the families never accepted that, and for 30 years they fought for the truth. And the truth has
I remember
come out.
seeing it. I remember seeing it on the news, and you could see people with their faces pressed up against the fence, that were purple and black, where they were being suffocated. You know, where the police had shut all entrances and just had one entrance open, and were letting them into one section, like thousands and thousands of people. In one small section, they were being crushed to death. And I think some of the football players, left the pitch, and others jumped over and pulled the fence down. And they would be given whatever it is, life-saving, bloody blah. And the police said, oh, well, they brought it on themselves, you know. It wasn't our fault. That's the police for you. Bleeding corrupt. Go on.
There were decisions made by police and the authorities where gates were opened, and that caused the stampede. That was all going on the TV back in 2011. And I'm sitting there in a real mess. Couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't make sense of, here's a job that I'd given 16 years of my life to, that I thought was about protecting children. There's nothing more important to me. And yet here I am for the second time, seeing senior officers closing down a job where I knew again of dozens of men that were abusing children. And I've got 4 kids of my own, as I said, and I just thought, knowing the kind of person that I am, I always do my best.
Right, so you've heard what she's got to say, okay? And she's not the only one. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's amazing. I love her to bits, yeah? And all I want to say, and I'm going to say it, is if you think a certain child, apparently and allegedly, went missing in Prat de Luz, in what's called Portugal, just slightly to the right of Spain, yes? I think they spent about £18 million, haven't they? And I'm looking for her. Oh dear, it's all BS, isn't it? And her dad was a surgeon, and the mum was a GP, and it's all very upper class, my dear. And a neighbour of her brothers, knew the Prime Minister. So Tony Blair got involved, everybody got involved, and we're all made to believe that this was a real thing. And they can't stop themselves, you know. I think it's called Black Ops in America, but in Britain, it's called the Find Maddie McCann police scam.
And I've got a very good sense of right and wrong. This wasn't about
just
being
as
a
well
police
you have,
officer.
darling, because no one
This
else
was just
you know
so
has.
wrong that any decent human being who heard what was going on would think it was wrong.
Everybody knew it was wrong.
And for police, for senior police officers, chief constables, to decide to close a job down when we had all...
But everybody was being called names. If you said anything, you were just a arsist, weren't you? Something, you know, a rude word. Yeah.
The evidence we needed.
Everybody was too scared to be called that word.
I didn't speak out about it.
I wasn't, I don't care.
Them. And I didn't want my kids to turn the telly on in 30 years' time.
No.
When I'm not here,
yeah,
and hear all about Rochdale and Operation Augusta and say, well, my mum worked on that. Why did she not say anything? So ultimately, I spoke to the boss on that job.
I'm pretty sure her horoscope sign is an Aries, you know. She's either an Aries, a Leo, or a Sagittarius. I'm not sure, but I think she is. Go on, darling.
I told her what I thought was wrong. She agreed with me. She said, you know, I agree with what you're saying, but I was only a detective. Senior officers make decisions, and you do as you're told.
Right.
And if you can't do that, maybe you're in the wrong job.
Oh.
Now, I've been struggling about what
I'm not
to
being
do
funny.
because
If you're a detective, aren't you supposed to detect stuff? And your senior officers are there for you to say, look, I've detected this, and I've detected that. And they're supposed to facilitate your, you know, future detectings, aren't they? Well, if you've detected it, I've got your back. But apparently not, you know, my darlings. Anyway, I think we've done enough. 22 minutes is far too long. Bless her. Get over to Expose the Sick Gangs Worse Than Epstein, Maggie Oliver, on the Heretics channel, run by the very intelligent and highly recommended Andrew Gold. With that, over now. I'm off to scoff me Friday night fish and chips food tubers, because I'm proper bleeding working class, and that's what you do, don't you, eh? Friday's got to be fish and chips every day of the week, hasn't it? Oh, so respect this lady. She's got a charity. I might do a live, actually, try and raise some money for her charity. But if you get over there and you look... I might put it in my description, actually. If anybody wants to bung her a couple of quid or a fiver, she does amazing work. Fair play to you, darling. Got your back.